Testify. I testify to this godless church. I have to say, brothers and sisters, friends across America, and all our friends out at sea, I just want to take a moment to welcome you all to this, the first official episode of the new series we shall henceforth call the official podcast of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints hyphenated. Yes, this is the actual podcast and not some cheap knockoff meant to deter you from faith by that vicious apostate and damnable Korihor Joe Rawlins, close quote, episode 1. And we'll workshop the name. We'll workshop it. If you know, you know. Go, John DeLynn. Take it all the way, buddy. All right. Now, otherwise, we shall go. Oh, you like that, Diana? You like that? This is the anthem of the Church of Korihor. It's called O Korihor. We have great hymns at the Church of Korihor. Today we're going to talk about the angry phase. And to get that going, I just want to remind you of a few things. We are the Church of Korihor, a godless church. Every little bit helps. People can give to our work at korihor.org/give. If you are here for the first time, you should know that I don't take a salary from the church. The church does raise funds from our donate page. The give page is separate. The give page is for donations for our work among the homeless and unsheltered, and our work to support the women and families abandoned by the Mormon polygamists down in Colorado City through an organization called Cherish Families. You also can look up Cherish Families and donate directly to them. They sure would appreciate it. Please mention the Church of Korihor. And you can also support SUMAC, that's the Southern Utah Mutual Aid Coalition, which we are receiving clothes, food, and anything other needful thing that you can think of to be distributed to migrant families in Southern Utah and Southern Nevada that are currently in hiding for reasons. If you need to ask why, maybe it's not for you. But in any event, you can also go to our donate page. It's korihor.org/donate if you want to give to the church. But generally, we do need money. So those of you who do that, I appreciate it. But otherwise, it'll be thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it. Like I said, we'll workshop the name of the official podcast of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Welcome, brothers and sisters, you fellow Mormons, to here. I can't keep up a pretense. That's why I'm not Mormon anymore. This is the Church of Korihor. You stumbled onto the wrong thing. I am John DeLynn. This is Mormon Stories. But yes, in any event, shall we sermonize? Let us do. You know, Jesus said, now don't panic, okay? I've not suddenly changed. All right. We're going to do this one time. Occasionally I bring up Jesus stuff. It's just for context. Jesus said that anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. But if that makes sense to you, okay, fine. It did to most of us who were Christians at some point. But I would ask you to also remember the counsel, ironically enough, from St. Paul. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And this is more or less the experience of all of us who have left church. When we leave church behind after a life of childlike obedience, we often become angry. And is that allowed? One of the movies that is a must-watch for ex-Mormons, ex-evangelicals, ex-Scientologists, etc., is The Truman Show. Thank you, Beth. Mary Beth, excuse me. Thank you, MB. The Truman Show. This is a movie that is absolutely cathartic. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, or even if you have, give it a rewatch at some point in time. And for me as an ex-Mormon, every time, you guys know that I love me One of my many guilty pleasures. I love me a good reaction channel. I got to plug my girl Jen Murray. Jen Murray's Truman Show watch. I haven't seen it in a long time, but it was good. Everything she does is good. But there are all these channels with reaction people, and I don't just watch the ones with women pretend that they're my girlfriend or something. Not always. I watch a lot of different reaction channels. In fact, funny enough, I ran into at Thrive St. George. I ran into the partner. I think I can say of um, why is my friend's name suddenly out of my brain? You guys know me and my brains. Sex therapist, family therapist, ex-Mormon, excommunicated. Somebody help me out, help me out. Dr. Natasha Parker, Natasha Helfer. Sorry, Natasha. We're actually quite close. Well, I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to. We are friends. The world is difficult to navigate. We are friends. Um, but she does have a partner taller than me that I met in person for the first time, whose name is Joe. Yeah, and it was a little disturbing how much like me he was. I'm not saying anything. We are friends, me and Natasha. And this guy, I immediately, once I started talking to him, I immediately saw what she liked about this guy. I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of in love with this guy. Joe is pretty freaking awesome. I don't know his last name. I've only seen him in pictures up until that point. And he starts telling me, he and I start having a conversation. I think we were talking to Kobe Reddish or to, um, I don't remember who we were talking to at the time. I want to say it was Nathan Hinckley over at the Bishop's interview. Anyways, we were shooting the shit. And he starts talking about this guy who has a reaction channel, and he hasn't gotten like 2 sentences out before I'm like, "Are you talking about Alex Hefner?" He's like, "Dude, Alex Hefner." I'm like, "Dude, I love it." All of a sudden, we were like bros, and I was like, "Man, I I don't know if Natasha found her soulmate. I'm a little concerned that maybe she found mine, and it's gonna get awkward. Maybe more so because we're both Joe." In any event, but I love me a good reaction channel at some point. And one of the things I love to do is to watch people experiencing, especially these people who didn't watch movies from our era, the Gen Xers. Like there are people who've never seen Back to the Future. There are people who have never, and to watch them the first time that Marty gets up there and starts cranking out Johnny Be Good, or to watch what the moment that George, oh sorry, spoiler alert. There's going to be spoilers all throughout this. You're on the channel of a movie buff, and I don't think about your experience at all. Um, so just be advised. The moment that George knocks out Biff, and it's like, oh shit, this is amazing. And to watch people experience it for the first time, it's like, it's very fulfilling. It's very fulfilling. And one of the ones that I love to watch people react to is the Truman Show. If you know, you know, because a lot, there have been that circulate through Reddit or Facebook groups for ex-Mormons, especially, a list of movies you have to watch because for so long we weren't allowed to watch. Most of us, those of us who were good Mormons, you heard what I said. We weren't allowed to watch rated R movies back in the 80s and 90s. Some of us were really bad. I wasn't that good of a Mormon, and I did watch movies anyways. I saw The Matrix when it came out. I saw Saving Private Ryan when it came out. I justified it by saying, well, I'm going into movie making when I grow up. So I need to know, I need to be able to talk the lingo, and I justified it any other way. I was sinning, according to the Mormon church. And I'm so glad that I did in retrospect. But the Truman Show is one that it's startling. I don't know that it's that people considered it bad to watch. I don't think it's even rated R. It might be. I guess maybe it is rated R, but I don't know. But I think maybe people think it's going to be boring because it looks like a movie about a reality TV show. How stupid is that? Even if it's got Jim Carrey in it and Laura Linney and Ed Harris and the guy who plays Biff in Back to the Future. Bet you forgot about that. Oh, um, but the theme behind each of these movies, there's always this list of movies you got to watch when you leave the Mormon Church: The Truman Show, The Matrix, Pleasantville, and apparently this new one from Apple TV, this new TV show from Apple TV called Severed. You hear people talk about ex-Mormons always talk uh about there being, what do you call it? About being my innie versus my outie, etc. So is my video frozen? Does anybody see me frozen? Anybody let me know. Okay. All right. I really need a noisemaker that lets me know when I'm looking at another screen, that when I'm looking at the other screen that somebody's talking to me here. I'll move I'll move this window over here and see if that helps. I'll keep my notes over here. Okay. But anyway, but the theme behind each of these films and or TV shows is similar. In the Truman Show, Jim Carrey's character. No, I'm going to have to go full screen on this. I'm sorry, guys. Um, Hopefully, I don't freeze on you. Jim Carrey's character is an unwanted child. So the movie starts out great. Actually, that's more or less before the movie starts, but they do take a moment where they go over it. That he was one of several unwanted children who is adopted by a corporation that's producing a show, and that corporation raises him to adulthood in a giant movie studio where he is the ultimate 24-hour reality TV show. And everyone is an actor except for him, and everything that he is fed is a lie. All of the people in his family are a lie. All of the sets, his house is a set, his work is a set, his education is a lie, his street is a lie, his neighbors are lies. Everything around him is a lie. And some of the actors see the deception and just put their heads down and do their job. Some of the producers of the show, they get it. The moral and ethical quandary of the fact that Truman doesn't realize he's on TV, and Truman doesn't realize that everything in his world is a lie. And they just put their head down and just take their paycheck and keep going. And all of the audiences, one of the great things about the movie is they cut away to the people watching the Truman Show, and the audiences all have different takes on it. Like they've all been there for when he was born, and when he took his first steps, and when he went on his first date, and when that was that one time with his dad in the water. If you know, you know, and then that one time with the girl he wasn't supposed to end up with, and does briefly. If you know, you know. I won't ruin everything. I won't spoil everything about the movie, but suffice it to say, it's a good movie, and it's very much something that ex-Mormons and Mormons, and I would say ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sure ex-Scientologists, definitely, former Mennonites. There are a lot of people. If you used to be super religious, you're gonna get the Truman Show, and it's gonna give you it's gonna throw you around a little bit. This movie, it's gonna fuck you up a bit. Okay, so but some of the people but a lot of people feel really badly about it and feel even a moral obligation to try and tell and make Truman aware that he's in a TV show and that no moment in his life really is private except for when he and his wife have sex. His wife, Meryl, who's played by Laura Linney, who's amazing. You got to see this movie. Laura Linney's amazing in everything. Okay, can we just say that? And the fact that her name is Meryl, like Meryl Streep, in the movie, it makes it even more. Yeah, love it. I love me a good movie. Uh, and he starts to pick up on these little clues. I mean, most of his life, it seems, all the way up into adulthood, Truman just is content to play the part, and everything in his life has been engineered literally by Ed Harris, who's in the moon. Like literally, he's the man in the moon. Uh, is guiding and directing his whole life, and even planting little lies. I'm tempted to tell you about it, but I am going to say some things for you if in case it hasn't spoiled. Ah, The Last Emperor? I haven't seen that. Huh. Cool. They do. Yes. Yes. You're talking about Truman Show. Yeah, they do. They plant in him a fear of going in the water, and they especially plant in him a fear of you're getting ahead of me, man. Getting ahead of me. So it goes like this. But then he starts to pick up on little clues, like how his wife Meryl is crossing her fingers in their wedding pictures. And if he stops and watches the neighborhood traffic, he sees the same extras going around and around the block in a big circle. If you've ever worked in or studied for film and television, the little things he picks up on, it's nostalgic. And then on another, it's very clear this is a movie about Hollywood, made by Hollywood, and you always those are some of my favorite movies, even though I never officially worked in Hollywood. But on another occasion, the fake world around him starts to make. On other occasions, the fake world around him makes mistakes. The people make mistakes. The things make mistakes. On one occasion, for example, a light falls from the sky way overhead in this giant dome that is the movie studio and nearly freaking kills him. He goes into a building that he normally wouldn't go into and discovers that the elevator has a green room behind it where there are actors sitting and relaxing and enjoying craft services. He can hear the radio broadcasts of the production team over the radio in his car. There's a poster in the travel agency where he goes to book a flight to go to Fiji. Won't go into what Fiji becomes an important device in the film. Uh, and as he's sitting there waiting to talk to the travel agent, he turns and finds that in the travel agency, there's a poster on the wall with a lightning bolt striking an airplane. And it says, "It could happen to you," because they can't have him go anywhere. They certainly can't have him going to Fiji, can they? Unless if he goes to Australia, which doesn't exist. You know, you know. When Truman figures out that most everything that he has been told in life is a lie, he can't go back to the way it was. Like Neo in the Matrix, he can't blue pill his way back into the illusion of reality. He has to know the truth. But the genie that he can't put back in the bottle is even more intense than that because it isn't just that everything that he knows is a lie. It's that all the people that he trusts and loves have lied to him in his whole life, all the way back to when he was born. He feels gaslit by the entire world, but most in particular, he feels gaslit. He is being gaslit by the people he trusts just for the most intimate understanding about the world, about what the nature of reality even is. And so naturally, he starts to crack up as he starts to see the little holes in the production. Finally, it cracks when he realizes that his wife, Meryl, is slightly afraid of him, even seems almost to hate him. And yet she wants to have a baby with him. She keeps talking about, well, when's the time we had a baby? And when she isn't stopping to sell him products, which are guaranteed placement, right? Product placement for the TV show. And she's like, oh, we can get this. I picked up one of these new 3-part slicer dicer peelers that is so convenient and on sale now. And he's like, wow, great. Right. But finally, it gets to a point when he's finally had enough. And his wife turns and gives him programmed product placement in a very ill-timed, sensitive moment where he is just sitting there basically deconstructing his whole reality, similar to how you or I once upon a time deconstructed evangelicalism or Christianity or Mormonism or just about anything. More and more, by the way, I'm seeing and meeting people who are deconstructing MAGA, and this is the newest cult that we're going to need to support. And I've been telling people this for over 2 years. even long before I started the Church of Korihor, and I said, there is going to need to be somebody out there who does the good work of setting up support groups and structure to catch the MAGA people as they realize how much how much deception has gone into manufacturing the false reality of their entire lives. And when it happens, the shit is really going to hit the fan. Sorry. Here I am. Hello. Everybody see me okay? Everybody see and hear me all right? Give me a give me a buzz. When I finally vibe code us a new app to broadcast from, boy, let me tell you, it's going to change the world. So he finally cracks up. At the point where he's finally had enough, his wife turns to him and gives him a program product placement. Why don't you let me fix you a cup of this new Mococo drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mount Nicaragua. No artificial sweeteners. And Truman looks at her and says, what the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to? She says, I've tasted other cocos. This is the best. And he says, what the hell does this have to do with anything? Tell me what's happening. And she says, well, you're having a nervous breakdown. That's what's happening. He says, you're a part of this, aren't you? And then she picks up the 3-in-1 slicer, dicer, peeler and says, you are scaring me. And he says, oh, Meryl, you're scaring me. What are you going to do? Dice me, slice me, or peel me? There's so many choices. And then he grabs her and turns her around to get the knife away from him. But she freaks out and screams at the camera buried in the ceiling, one of many cameras in the room, and screams, do something. And then he pulls around. He pulls her around and faces her and says, oh, was I frozen? Was I only video frozen or frozen? Hopefully just video frozen. Man, I'll tell you what. Let me see if I can close my Adobe Premiere. Probably taking up some of my RAM. Blah, blah, blah. Just video. Okay. Sorry about that then. Sorry. That'll happen sometimes. Here at the Church of Korihor, we do mistakes, but we do them better than other people, which means that we acknowledge them right away and don't wait 200 years to admit to it. Not looking at anybody, President Oaks. Not looking at anybody, President Hinkler. Not looking at anybody, Douglas, man. Anyway. But oh, that's interesting. Ross, Ross, we got to talk about that. Yeah, there's interesting in the Korihor argument. Tell a story about a guy. There was this an interesting story about a guy. I forget the kind of dementia he has, but where he was in a car accident, and I think it's the lining in part of his brain. I think it was like the lining in this fusiform gyrus got severed or something. But they, in any event, basically the communication between the part of his brain that recognized a person's face and the part of his brain that recognized that he basically got artificial face blindness. And so when his mother came in, they had his mother as an experiment come into the room to console him, and he got really upset about it. He got like really pissed off about it, and they're like, okay. And then she left. And she, of course, was distraught. And they had her come around to another room and call him on the phone instead. And so he picks up the phone, hears his mother's voice on the other end of the line. And then he begins to tell her, Mom, you wouldn't believe this, right? They just had this woman come into my room pretending to be you. And I had to explain to them, that is not my mother. That's an imposter, because that's how his brain worked. You can imagine what it's like. You don't, and most of us, you don't have to imagine what it's like to have your whole world suddenly crumble around you as you begin to deconstruct. Well, if that's true about Truman and the Truman Show, okay, how is it not true about all the many times in which we have been told at some point, listen, you're going to go to the Grand Canyon with us? It's an experience that everybody has to have. At the same time, it's going to bring up some questions about Noah's Ark. Just so that you know, any thoughts you have about Noah's Ark are an offense to God, so don't think them. Or anything that you learn today in the Museum of Natural History about evolution is a lie planted by the devil to the sinful scientists who just like to have as much smoke as much dope and have as much sex and hookers as they can possibly imagine, because scientists, they're all led away by Satan. And, they're all fallen natural men who just want to sin as much as they can, so they'll make up anything to come up with it. We all have something, right? Because there's these moments, and probably the most disheartening of all of those things that we get told, these lies that we get told when we were children. And in many of our cases, like in Mormonism, we say you are born in the covenant, but that just means born into the religion. If you were born into the covenant, you there are things that make up your fundamental understanding of the nature of reality, that when you discover that's not possible, it causes serious cognitive dissonance. Mind you, remember, cognitive dissonance doesn't mean that you believe something that's false. I think it would be startling to any of us how much of what we understand about reality is false. That's not what cognitive dissonance is. Cognitive dissonance is carrying two opposing ideas about the world in the same brain at the same time. And not only can it happen, I actually heard a Mormon apologist say this once. He said, I am grateful for my cognitive dissonance. And I remember thinking, did this guy just say that? I think it was Don Bradley, maybe. He said, I'm glad I have cognitive dissonance, he says, because if I just believed in complete blind faith, I would never feel like I could trust my reality, was what he was saying. And so if I can let my doubts live alongside with my faith in my brain, then at least I know that I'm being convinced of the truth of the thing I believe in spite of my doubts. And I remember listening to it and thinking in that moment, going, okay, hold on, let me wrap my head around this. I mean, I guess that's something that I always did when I was an adult Mormon. But there's something very disconcerting about realizing how much of your childhood and these formative years in your childhood were part of the deception. Does that make sense? Right. That's a good one. Or dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. You ever heard, at least in Mormonism, so many of us were brought up to believe that dinosaurs were the remains of creatures from other planets, because this world was organized and not just created out of nothing, because God doesn't create anything out of nothing. And that's how we definitely were more advanced than other Christians. Boy, were we full of ourselves. Oh boy, did we have a high and mighty view of ourselves. But I tell you, especially for a group that, like in the South Park episode, where we were brought up to hear this faith affirming story that definitely proves the Book of Mormon is true, about how Joseph Smith and Martin Harris lost the 116 pages of the Book of Lehi. But boy, miracle of miracles, you know the rest. If you know the rest, you know the rest. And this is what was really so gaslighting about our particular denomination, is that we were made to feel like this definitely affirms that the gospel is true and that Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon are true. If you're not convinced of it, then you must be a bad person. You must be a sinner who will make up anything in the world too. And then it always came down to the same things that Mormons want people to believe, that our religion is about more than that. But then whenever somebody says, well, what about, Joseph Smith and Teenage Brides, Joseph Smith and this, Joseph Smith and that? Well, what about Brigham Young and this? What about the priesthood? What about this? What about that? Then shockingly, they go back to the thing that our religion is more than. Oh, you people just want to drink coffee and alcohol. Is it really that important to you? And I have to say, they have a fair point when stated that way. I say this, and there will be some Mormon who will clip this part dishonestly and just leave out the rest. if if your salvation were a real thing you could work out in fear and trembling before God, and you did give it up for a cup of coffee, boy, that is a sucker move. I'll tell you this. I love me some coffee, but I mean, if hell were real and the celestial kingdom were real, and you gave it up for coffee, you'd be a real sucker. You'd be a real sucker. That's stupid. That's a bad move, right? If the what do you call it? Mathematician Pascal's wager. If Pascal's wager were based on something that was real, Pascal would be right. Whatever you have to do to convince yourself of that God, you should do it. The problem is, first of all, who's to say that saying prayers or singing hymns and going to church is what the God who created the entire cosmos and then hid from us his entire existence wants you to do so that you can qualify for heaven? Who gets to say that? Who's to say that this denomination or that denomination is right about it? And beyond that, why then were we told and made to understand for so long that this is the true doctrine that answers all of your questions? And if it doesn't answer your questions, it's not something wrong with the church. It's not something wrong with the scripture. It's not something wrong with God. It's something wrong with you. When you deconstruct that, when you red pill that point, do you have a right to be angry? Of course you do. Because you realize the sabotage of your entire life, of your entire understanding of reality. And incorporated into that were so many things that we were taught that had all of these negative repercussions all the way down the line in our lives. Consider how many people, for these religions that are all true, supposedly, and all of them are based upon God, and all of them are moral cases for the protection of the innocent and protection of virtue and goodness. Consider how many of us learned some variation of the licked cupcake. How many of us heard about virtue or virginity and sexual innocence in some variation of something that had to do with something you put in your mouth, something that you taste, and the taste is gross, or it's wet and salivary, like and salivated, like the case of the licked cupcake. Imagine these analogies created by adults to teach children about their own bodies and about their own sexuality at the time in our lives when that was a very sensitive and important point. And how many people around you that had experiences like yours, and how many had experiences so much unlike yours that were even worse. I remember the first time that I was talking to somebody. I was talking to a woman who had left the church or was thinking about leaving the church, about how much damage the little factory talk had done to us as young Mormon men, and how many men I knew who recount and who can recount the trauma of this talk by Boyd K. Packer and the pamphlet that you got if you were a particularly dirty, sinful boy, the infamous blue for young men only pamphlets, or to young men only pamphlet. And that's the same one, by the way, where we learned that if your missionary companion, when you go on your mission, makes a pass at you First of all, sidelined with that one, like, it's possible that they send gay missionaries out there with the rest of us? Yeah. Boy, are you in for a shock? Boy, was I in for a shock. Not only do they send gay guys on missions with the rest of us straight guys, it became a sample group of understanding how many gay people are around you in the church, and never and just forced to live in the closet all the time, is when you are living with a guy full time, and he gets weird and squirrely when you strip down to your garments, and he gets weird and squirrely, when when you're going to sleep, and yeah, anyways, things get weird. I'm not saying anything happened to me on my mission other than what you guys already know, and nothing that had to do with my gay companions, of which I'm sure I had at least 3 gay companions. I won't say any more on that. I respect their journey. I hope they're happy now. I haven't been in contact with any of them. Anyway, but I remember talking to this woman, and she's like, and she says, "Yeah, I didn't even know about that. I didn't even know about the little factory talk." He compared it to a little factory? That's messed up. And I'm like, "Well, it wasn't the littleness of the factory, though, now that I'm thinking about it." I have since made the wisecrack, "Well, maybe his is a little factory. Baby boy K Packers is little." But that's when somebody explained, and then when she explained to me how, um, the chewing gum analogy had affected her, and how it had affected not only her perspective of sex and virginity, and that she, at that point in her tender years, was already chewing gum, like the reason why Elizabeth Smart, by the way, developments on the Elizabeth Smart story. I won't say anything about it. I haven't read much about it yet, but sounds like she's doing great. Good for her. I'm super proud of her. However she ends up in the whole religious thing, I don't really even care about that anymore. But I just want her to thrive, you know. And but she had said, she gave that talk years ago, back when I started in my documentary about Mormons and sex. Started One of the reasons why I did that was a talk that she had given, where she talked about how she had learned at school about this chewing gum analogy, and that was the reason why she didn't run away from the man who believed that he was the next Joseph Smith, who had kidnapped her when she was only 14 years old. And you can say, well, obviously, and and it was shocking at the time when I was talking to people in the church, and they said, you can't compare Brian David Mitchell with Joseph Smith. He assaulted a 14-year-old girl. And that's how he's not like Joseph Smith. Okay, got it. Got it. Okay. Cool. Cool, 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 cool. And so many of these women, as I started to interview women about their story with learning about sex, how many of women, their trauma had less to do with just sex, and had to do with their body and their body image. How many women felt pressured to not eat, and felt that reinforced with the sexuality analogies. And so, how particularly cruel it was to compare sexuality to chewing gum, a thing that you chew so that you don't eat, or to a cookie, a thing that is an indulgence that good girls don't eat because they want to keep it trim so that they can get a husband who is a priesthood holder so that they can have families. And all of this stuff about your self-worth is wrapped up in this doctrinal principle, and women who had lived through that, turning around and teaching to girls who were going through it, and teaching them the same thing. And even more than that, as I started talking to women who had left the church as adults, or come out of it as adults, and remembered the guilt and shame associated with having been a woman who taught that to girls and having to repair that. So is it startling that somebody would go through that, deconstruct it, and come out the other side and feel angry? Of course you feel angry. Of course you do. Now there are people who have told me it's not necessary to go through an angry phase. And I choose to believe that they are right. I went through one that was well more than 2 decades, frankly. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm only coming out of my angry phase in the last 5 years or so. And I wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't. Even though I did a lot of toxic things as a strident, angry atheist, and I hurt people's feelings, and I did some toxic things I regret now. But it was a part of the journey for me. It was a purging of the guilt and the offended part of me, that part of me that was hanging on to being gaslit by everybody around me. I had to purge that out. But somewhere along the way, I can see as I look back that the longer that it went on, my angry phase, is the more toxic I became and the more it started to hurt people around me, and come to realize that I was wasting my life in a way, that there were years of my life where even if my anger was righteous anger and justified, that it became another way that the church still had an impact on my life, still had a control on my life. And however much I wanted to rail against every Mormon who accused me of, you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. If I could at least admit this much of what they were saying was true, that they think that we left the church because it isn't true, because they're constantly in the process of trying to convince themselves that the church is true. They cannot yet see, and maybe will never see, that it's the gaslighting, it's the betrayal, it's the lying, the sabotage of people around you that made you angry. And they can't even see that because they're too busy doing it to themselves, sabotaging themselves, planting, like, what do you call it? What's the movie? Um, yeah, in Inception. They're trying to incept themselves and incept people around them with these simple ideas of faith just to keep their world together. That they can't entertain the idea of, it's not that it was a lie, it's that you lied to me. It's that you made me lie to other people. It's that you sent me to a foreign country and had me put my family's name on my chest and lie to strangers about their family's religion and tell them that the religion their parents believed in was wrong, and that they wouldn't be obedient to God if they didn't abandon everything that their parents had taught them and their parents had taught them and their parents had taught them, and come and follow Joseph Smith's religion instead. That's why the 116 pages of the Book of Lehi matter. That's why the very clear problems in the story of the martyrdom of Korihor matter. And that's why it certainly matters that somebody told Elizabeth Smart that she couldn't, made Elizabeth Smart feel like she couldn't run away from her captor because he had chewed her chewing gum, and she said that she didn't think even her parents would want her anymore. What does her chewing gum getting chewed have to do with her parents loving her? Because that's such the understanding of a child. I mentioned that I started shooting interviews with Dr. Finlayson Fife and with Natasha Helfer and some other people about Mormons and sex. right about the time when I left the church, when I formally was kicked out of the church. Yes, I was excommunicated, and I wouldn't and while I wouldn't shame anybody for resigning instead of being excommunicated, I cannot recommend enough get excommunicated. It's a blast. Um, it really is probably one of the best. I still think it's one of the best decisions I ever made, but that's for me. And I started talking to them, and I had asked Dr. Finlayson Fife. I've told this story before, so forgive me for repeating it. Those of you who've been here, but you know, it's a good one. It's a good story. Dr. Finlayson Fife, Jennifer Finlayson Fife, she had started into her work with women and particularly with Mormon women and sexuality when yeah, boy, isn't that the case, Jesse? It's so true. Boy, the trauma to unpack there, man. You guys saw my Godless sermon last week, right? About if I could go back and talk to my missionary self. But she started into this study of women, Mormon women particularly, who couldn't achieve orgasm, and recognized an opportunity there to serve women in her own community. She is LDS. I don't know if she's still LDS, but I think she is still LDS. And she wrote her dissertation at BYU, I think, about women, being pre-orgasmic into their 40s in the Mormon church. And I asked her in one interview, I said, "Spill the beans, give us the secret sauce. How is it you're having so much success with women in the church deconstructing their inability to orgasm?" And she said, "Oh, it's simple." She's like, I'll give you the secret sauce. It's easy. And, working it out with a therapist is what's going to help, probably most, but people can do it on their own at home. She said, and I give it away to everybody. She said, I'll tell it to everybody. And she said, I ask these women in counseling, usually with their husbands, with their Mormon husband there. And she says, and I tell them, do you believe that God made your body and designed your body? And they say, yes, of course. Do you believe that God has a body and designed your body after his body with purposes like his body? And they say, yes. As I understand, Natasha Helfer, I think, actually goes bluntly when she does a similar thing and says, we have a heavenly mother. There are heavenly mothers. There's a heavenly mother, or in any event, whether there is a heavenly mother or there are heavenly mothers, you have a heavenly mother. And she has a female body as we understand female bodies. And she says, do you believe that every part of your body has a purpose? And when they say, yeah, of course I do. I believe all these things. I always have believed these things. And she says, what is the purpose of a clitoris? And she says, men, their whole sexual apparatus is multi-purpose, serves all these other functions. But a clitoris got one purpose. And when you don't use this beautiful thing that your Heavenly Father designed on your body for the one purpose that it was made for. And she said, and I think she even pointedly said in the interview, I really ought to release these interviews. She said, and it isn't just reproduction, because the clitoris doesn't necessarily exclusively play a role in reproduction. Its purpose is purely for sexual pleasure. And she said, when we don't use your clitoris for the one purpose it was designed for, you are not giving yourself the opportunity to enjoy and to fulfill the measure of your creation. This is you not being obedient to God's command. You're not choosing to participate in his holy plan, his divine plan for you and your body. And she said, when I tell Mormon women this who are pre-orgasmic, it changes their whole outlook on life. As it so happens, the next couple of days after that interview, I was talking to an ex-Mormon woman who was an atheist and told her, you wouldn't believe this crazy thing that Jennifer Finlayson Fife told me. And then I explained this to her. And she had been pre-orgasmic, she explained, up until she left the church, until she left her husband I think in her 40s. She was close to 40 in any event. And she left the church, and like so many women I've known and talked to, especially since being polyamorous, um, I, who have said, you know, I didn't think well into my 40s that I could like sex, that I could enjoy sex. I thought I was one of these people. I thought I was frigid or cold or whatever, that, that these words so toxic and hurtful, but that describes me because I just don't get it. I don't get why it appeals. And then they say, and then so often with women who were married to a gay man in the church who married her as a beard to cover up for the fact that he was gay. And oftentimes, when men will do this, when they marry a woman to cover up and stay in the closet, they'll find women who fit what they think the ideal is to straight men, so that almost on a subliminal level, almost on a not subliminal, what do you call it? Uh, almost on a base psychological level. They look for women that they think are especially attractive in the eyes of straight men, so that straight men won't single them out and figure out that they are gay. And never mind the fact of the psychological subconscious. Thank you. Uh, they don't think about it because on a subconscious level, you're not really thinking. You're not thinking in an active alpha wave way, right? About the damage that that's doing, emotional cost that that woman is paying when she spends her whole life, gives away 10, 20 or more years to somebody who makes her feel unwanted every time that they recoil to her touch, or every time that she says, hey, I'm going to, I'm thinking I might slip into something more comfortable, and then he drags his feet and gets, and starts making up excuses. And then these women, many of these women, when they leave the church after their husband comes out as gay, or after their husband, or after leaving a narcissistic and abusive relationship where their husbands use them for sex, and then, and expect them to obey and expect them to give it up, you know, on a regular basis as much as he wants, and not respect or try to encourage her to enjoy it herself, or to share what she desires. Um, it's not until then that they leave their marriage, that they then leave the church, and for the first time end up going on dates with other people who know what they're doing, and aren't just trying to use her for sex, and aren't just trying to use her to cover up for his lack of sexuality, and or for his homosexuality and his hiding in the closet about his sexuality. And for many of these women, it became the first time in their lives that they realized that it's not that they hated sex, it's that they just were with somebody who either didn't know how to do it, or weren't or wasn't interested in it with her because he wasn't interested in it with a woman to begin with. And to the FOMO of all these years of your youth, of your childbearing youth, of ages, if that's what the way you want to look at it, of um, your career, the years when she could have been studying to set herself up for a better career and to be able to have something set aside, the years she could have been raising children with a man who wanted to be with her, were all lost because of the selfishness of the person that she was with. And even if she loves him and says, well, I still love you in spite of everything because you still are the man that I married, but go your way and do your own thing. How tragic then that there's all this damage that's done there. And of course you're angry. If you get angry, of course you're angry. You have every right to be angry. In any event, I was telling this story about Jennifer from Lace and Fife and what she taught me with this woman who was an atheist like me now. And as soon as I told her the story about what Jennifer Finlayson Fife had told me. She broke down and cried, and it was cathartic for her, and it was distressing for her. And she said, "Why am I crying right now? I don't understand. Why am I so upset?" And I said, I couldn't tell you. I mean, there must be some repression, serious repression going on. And she said, I don't want to be I don't want to upset you, but I have to go. I can't. I have to process this. She's like, this makes no sense. I feel so I don't believe any of this shit. And yet what you just explained to me is so what's the word she used? It's so it feels so healing for me, and yet at the same time it pisses me off. And so it so happens that we had a phone call, myself and Dr. Finlayson Fife, and I told her this story. And by the time before I got to the end of that story, that little tangent that I just gave you just now, and she said, "Of course." And I said, "Of course." I'm like, "You say that as if this is something I should have expected. I grant you I am autistic and I don't always know what the social accept what was I supposed to say here?" And she said, "No, of course it feels healing to her, and of course that upsets her. Her inner child is Mormon." And it took everything I had to not laugh right there and then. But instead I said, "Wait a minute. Is that how that works?" And she said, "Yeah." And she explained to me then, she's like, "Look, the inner child isn't something that really exists. It's a work. It's a piece of work that we do to try and help everybody to understand, to help a client understand. While we think that you were one creature when you were a child, and now you are a different creature when you are an adult, it's the same being. It just has more responsibilities, more experience, more money, more capabilities, and yet has a lot more that you have to do. But that scared child that doesn't understand the world and has their entire reality constructed for them by other people and by their experiences as a child that is in a vulnerable position that won't survive without an adult taking care of them. That world, that creature doesn't suddenly realize internally all the ways in which their childhood was full of people not telling them things about the world, that your parents, because they love you, don't tell you what was going on at Epstein's Island. Your parents don't beat you over the head with, what the satanic panic is about all around you. They're hoping that you don't have to experience that right now. They're trying to protect you and keep you in a place where you're not overwhelmed and anxious all the time, and give you a chance to be a child, as people in my parents' generation would say, as my own mother would say. I believe in allowing children to be children. That's how my mother explained to me that she felt no qualms about telling us about Santa Claus and letting us believe in Santa Claus, and also Joseph Smith, and then reinforcing that, well, Santa Claus is obviously not real, but Joseph Smith is. Jesus is, God is. In any event, you got to let children be children and not let them turn around and say, "Wait a minute. Okay, so this Book of Lehi thing, it should proves that the Book of how the North Pole, no, but the Book of Mormon, yes." I okay, whatever. I said, Is that how it works? You have to talk to your inner child if you do inner child work with language that your inner child understands." And she said, "Yes, of course." And I said, "Like even using the words that it understands?" She says, "If that makes a difference, then yes." I said, "So I'm an atheist, been an atheist for a long time, deconstructed Mormonism while I was a missionary. But if I wanted to do inner child work and go back and talk to my inner child, Joey, I would have to say words like Heavenly Father and Heavenly Father's plan, the celestial kingdom, Like it says, and like the Savior says, and the adversary, all this Mormon language. And she said, "You have to talk to the inner child in language that it understands." Yes. I said, "Pff, I'm never doing that." And she said, "Yeah, you don't have to. It's just one tool in the toolbox." Um, but I didn't realize at that time how much that had started to bother me. And the reason why recently, as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that not only did I need this, not only do we ex Mormons need this, but our ex evangelical brothers and sisters and friends, our ex Scientologist brothers and sisters and friends, all need this. We who have left religion we all have a need to deconstruct and to go back to some form of this inner child work. And I couldn't do it until, as many of you have been here from the beginning and know, I've talked about this. I began to use psychedelics, which I hear a lot of people these days speaking like I used to talk about psychedelics, and even people I respect quite a lot. And I have to say, I remember doing the same thing and saying, okay, well, that's just getting high. So I'm not really sure what kind of inner work you think. No one's talking to you, phone. Uh, I don't know what kind of insight you think you're going to get from your own brain while you are high. And it took people who had done it before to explain to me all these other people have done it and say they got something good out of it when they do it right. And you can't take that as evidence that it could work, that you could be worth a try. What are you afraid of? And to be honest, I didn't want to say. What I really was afraid of was that it would work, that it would work, and that I would suddenly come to an abrupt realization like the woman I had talked to had, that I didn't need to be angry anymore, or that I had wasted my time being angry. And that made me I became aware in this transition period in my life. This moment took somebody saying that to me, giving me this objective outside opinion, like I'm trying to do with you right now. That's what's happening. Whether it's psychedelics work, whether it's parts work, whether it's EMDR, whether it's just talk therapy, whether it's even therapy, whether it's finding a spiritual director like Brett Hartley or whatever it may be, even just talking to somebody, even just taking time to do journaling. I was listening to this thing earlier about how important journaling is because it was Alain de Botton. Boy, if you want to read something that'll really knock your socks off, or listen to something, if you want something to watch and listen to, look up Alain, Alain, de Botton, Botton. He's a modern day philosopher, founder of the School of Life. And he was talking about how we are only beginning to understand that because all of these formative things, these formative values of our lives, and the anxiety and the way that we treated anxiety and fears, reasonable fears when we were children, were developing at the same time that our brain was developing the capacity for language. And that's the reason why journaling is so effective. It's not just putting your thoughts down on the paper. It's that the parts of your brain, this is the way I interpret it, way he said, it's the parts of your brain that form language are the same parts that your childhood, that remember your childhood and that your childhood was formed in. So when you write it and formulate it into words, that's why it's healing to engage in journaling. And he said it's a reason why he even introduced this concept of ugly journaling I'd never heard of before. They said people who collect pretty journals tend not to write in them. And so there's like this new thing that people apparently there's this new thing that people are doing where it's like where they say to purposely buy an ugly journal. Buy a journal that you don't feel guilty muddying up with your words, because you need to use your words. It's the whole point. The whole point is to get the words out. So don't buy a pretty one and then worry and have the anxiety about, well, what if I screw up and scratch it out and blah, 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 blah. Buy one that you can scratch it out in. Buy one that you can write in with whatever pen or paper, pen or pencil is available right now. Ugly journal it, and that apparently knocks things loose for some people who tend to buy journals and then not fill them with anything, because it's more important that you get the words out, because your formative brain, that inner child, and the 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 anxieties of that inner child are there definitely with the same parts of your brain that formed with language. That just knocked me back just recently. This was just yesterday I was listening to this. In any event, but so I tried it. And as many of you who have been here with us before have heard me say, I met my inner child and I promised him that I would protect him. That I'll never let anybody hurt you. I was thinking about this today, or no, sorry, yesterday, as I was writing this sermon. And I remember, and I realized the real thing that I wasn't ready for when I started to deconstruct my anger with the church. Two things. Let me just get this really quick. Okay. Sure, I don't see why not, Diane. Yeah, I don't know, but I would say yes. If that makes sense to you, I would do it. In fact, that could be a hell of a cool sacrament to come up with. Is it okay to burn your journal after you're done writing it? I think that's a great idea. In fact, there's a whole philosophy, a whole theory people do about like writing things down and burning them. That could be a whole thing. That could be cool. Fill a journal with all of your childhood, feelings, all that trauma, and then burn it. Cool. I don't know. Try it. If it makes sense to you, I say try it. Um, but one thing that I wasn't prepared for with deconstructing my angry phase and learning to approach my inner child work, and reparenting is another word that they use with it, is taking the role of your inner child's parent, because you are the only actual person here and you are an adult and you take responsibility. That to heal my inner child was to take the responsibility of a father, like I give to my own sons, like I give to my children. That to protect Joey was like protecting Jojo, was like protecting Elijah, was like protecting Scarlet. That if I could protect, that I'd spent this whole life hating myself, and especially hating my Mormon self, without realizing that that Mormon self that was my past self was not an adult man who was a Mormon. It was a child who was a Mormon. It was a child who was an atheist, who was being constantly gaslit into being a Mormon by people who had the best of intentions in some cases, and other people who I do believe had nefarious purposes. But for the most part, they were people who were trying to make sense of their own trauma and pain, and using flawed thinking and flawed logic in it. And the way that they reinforced it and were taught by the church to reinforce it was to teach it to other people, primarily teach it to people you were converting to the faith, including the children that you're converting to the faith. Because ultimately, even if you are raised in the church, you are still a convert. You're just a convert who's being converted by the people you trust with everything in your life, and who are doing it oftentimes, I would say generally more the rule than the exception, because they love you and they want to help you and don't know what else to tell you. And when you become a parent, you realize how much of life is that, how much of being a parent is that, of telling your children what you think they need to hear and hoping they don't figure out how little you've figured out. And suddenly, as a parent, I could get that. So when I could connect that love for myself and for my inner child was just like love for my real children. That to if I wouldn't allow somebody to say that to my JoJo, uh, then I shouldn't allow anybody, including myself, to say it to Joey. It was life transforming for me. And you don't have to do psychedelics to do it, and you don't have to do journaling to do it, and you don't have to do EMDR to do it. You don't have to do parts work and internal family systems to do it, as far as I know, because I know people who have done one or all of these, and I know people who have done none of these and have still, when they learned and really heard this and put it into practice in some way, they found a ritual of some kind in their lives to apply this principle in practice. If it made sense to them, they found something useful in it. It was in that moment that I came to realize that the little boy that I met was terrified. And I thought he was angry because I was a pretty angry kid. I'm a pretty angry person. And it's not been till, I'm hitting menopause now, and it's pretty easy to say, now I've got my anger under control. Well, it's a lot easier when your testosterone is waning. I can tell you that right now. But also, I think that the psychedelics helped, and this inner child work helps, and internal family systems. I know people who do parts work in internal family systems who just swear by it. And as I understand it, EMDR is really just an extension of this same parts work, um, and including IFS, internal family systems. Yeah, IFS. And in any event, try it. Try something. If you don't try this or that, try something. Uh, but I realized that this scared boy wasn't just Mormon, and that I'd spent so much time being afraid to go through this door, metaphorically speaking, of course, not because I was afraid to meet this Mormon child who was me, is because I was afraid to meet the autistic child that was me. And this isn't everybody's story, but I'm just going to use it as a way for us to all come together and really understand it, especially because I really do think that there's a whole other level of trauma for those of us who are neurodivergent, whatever that means. And I've met so many women who are who are diagnosed OCD, or so many men who are diagnosed with depression, and so many people men especially, who are diagnosed with hypersexuality or ADHD, and and almost always those two go together. And it turns out that nothing addictive is going on, that people, men and women, get shamed for hypersexuality who are really on the spectrum and using sexuality for stimming, just in the same way that they would that autistic people use all other kinds of things for stimming, and that could have to do with self-harm. Almost always it has to do with self-harm, and it has to do with ideation. And that these are normal autistic things, and that this normal autistic child, if you will, that I was constantly battered with a sentence to a death by 1,000 cuts all the time, and saw the whole world as if it were against him, simply because he was made to feel like the pressure on him and his reaction, his nervous system's natural reaction to pain and to pressure and overstimulation in the world around him, was constantly being shamed. It wasn't until I was an adult that I had the presence of mind and the objectivity of looking at Joey as his father, as his parent, to say and to ask, "Hey, do you remember when I was a kid and you guys used to say, 'That's Joey and he's always in his own little world,' like that? It's Joey's always in his own little world." And to realize that people who loved me and had said that about me when I was a kid said, It didn't sound like that, did it? Yes, I remember saying those words, but I thought it was adorable. I was Joey, he's always off in his own little world. How is wait a minute, how is that nice? It's not a nice thing to say about a child. And to realize that people who loved me when one were like, "You think we said that to be mean?" Well, yeah, because it's always about how I'm not like you and I'm not like anybody else because 'cause I'm a weirdo. Or all the times when I was a teenager, and it's like, my mother would remind me, "Joseph, it's always the quiet ones." And I would look at her with these eyes that I felt like I was beaming out of my eyes. Finish the sentence. Finish that sentence. It's always the quiet ones that what? Go in and shoot up a school? What are you saying? Are you comparing me to the Columbine kids? Because that's what had recently happened when I was a teenager. And I thought that's what she was saying. It's always the quiet ones. The fuck does that mean? What are you saying about me? And it wasn't until I was an adult who had a voice and recognized that I feel like I am shooting questions or thoughts or sentences out of my eyes to people like, okay, finish your statement. Or what do you realize that's hurtful? Do you realize that that's why are you saying these mean things about me? Why are you trying to make me feel bad about myself? And I thought I was beaming this out of my face with my facial expressions, but my autistic ass was like, or more like this, that because I didn't interact and communicate in a neurotypical way, people didn't know what I was feeling. That I had to, just like how I need more often than not people to put into words and don't infer something. Don't pretend like you can say you can leave the quiet part unsaid and I'm going to pick up on it. I have autism. Please say it all. Say everything you're trying to say in words, please, because I'm not likely to pick up everything that you're saying. And people do this to me, and I don't pick it up. And apparently, I give it back, and they don't pick it up. And it's like, no, it's as an adult that I've had to say, so listen, I have autism. So if you think that I understood something you were saying without words, don't, because I don't. I probably didn't. I didn't. You need to say it. Especially if it's important, please pull me aside and tell me out loud, or send me a text message. Use your words with me, because if you think, oh, I understand, I don't. I assure you, I probably don't actually. And I had to have that talk with me and say, you need to do that. You need to tell the neurotypicals that you are having feelings. And if you need to process something, you can't just say, well, they know. No, don't assume they know. Say it, because sometimes you think you communicated a thing and you did not. Um, and it was in that moment that I come to realize that I was so constantly overwhelmed as an autistic child, undiagnosed, because nobody knew to call these behaviors autism at the time. And that's no one's fault, really. That's just, I mean, we still don't understand what autism is. Certainly they didn't understand in 1980 that a boy born in 1980 who never looks people in the eye, and who, when other people talk and they think that he has hearing problems because he's watching their mouth talking, and think, "Oh, he must not hear very well because he reads lips." That's something that my teachers would tell my parents. I think Joey doesn't hear very well because he reads lips. And when really what it was is that I was fascinated and fixated with how human beings could communicate all the time with their mouths. And I remember that. I'm like, no, it's just I was grossed out by mouths. It's like, that's wet. It's a wet hole in your face, and with flesh and tongues and lips and things you use to decorate them, and you're using them, and you're blowing through them like a horn. And this concept in my brain just would just fire all of these alarm bells all at once, going, can you, okay, do I really have to have a conversation with you and your wet face hole right now, because I really can't handle it right now? But I couldn't say that. Of course I couldn't say that because I was a child. A child doesn't know that you're supposed to say something if it bothers you, or pretend that it doesn't bother you until it actually doesn't bother you. Or, these are all things that you understand as an adult that maybe some people as children can intuitively get it, but I didn't. And so for so many much of my life, people thought that I had no feelings. And the reality was quite the opposite. I don't know if you guys follow this. There's a channel called Epistemic that I just love this guy's stuff. And they have like various channels, Epistemic Crisis and things like this. But it's a couple, a man and his wife, and they're a neuromixed relationship. His name is Adam. I'm trying to remember what her name is. But they're always making these short videos about him saying, I'm neurotypical and my wife is neurodivergent or autistic ADHD, just diagnosed as an adult. And what is this? And they like compare the way they receive and understand things in the world. And she's like, you don't have that inner voice. And he'll be like, inner voice, what do you mean? It's like a narration. It's like always going. It's like always telling and narrating. And he's like, no, well, you have that. And she's like, yeah, everyone has that. He's like, never once in my life have I felt like that. She's like, so what? You just like, if no one's talking to you and you're not talking to anybody else, it's just quiet. And he's like, yeah. She's like, and she reacts viscerally. And it's like, right on, girl. She's and it's so entertaining to watch them. And at the same time, it feels a little trauma bondish, right? It's like, oh, we're trauma bonding strangers over the internet. Yeah, let's do it. Let's go full on. But they're the greatest. And now he's starting to make political content. And I got to be honest with you, I'm like here for it. I didn't realize actually for like the past year he's been doing, he has had these other channels where he makes political content. And I'm like, oh my God, Adam has the neurotypical half of my favorite neuro mix couple content creators makes content about politics. Oh my God. And he's like spot on about things. I'm like, oh my God, this is my new rabbit hole. I'm gonna find out what Adam thinks, and he's the neurotypical one. Anyway, so I was watching some of their content recently, and I was thinking about this, the difference between neurotypical people and neurodivergent people, and thinking first of all, how we still don't know how broad the spectrum is. And this is going to get a little bit current politics ish right now. There was last night, there was the White House, Correspondents' Dinner. If you remember. The gentleman involved, as soon as the news started going around in Torrance, California, where apparently this individual is from, they started asking people because you know, in the early days of the reporting, it's probably going to be a lot of bullshit and like stupid things. Oh, his neighbor said, it's always like that, right? Remember what happened with Butler, Pennsylvania? Oh, well, his high school teacher said, who cares what his high school, because they're trying to get anything out there. And they came out this morning with this. Somebody had talked to the guy's next door neighbor. It's always the stupidest information they get from the neighbor who goes, I'd never imagine. Really? You would never? Great. Why? Why? Guys, put more effort in, right? And this neighbor had said, maybe I think he could be on the spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a second here just not getting angry. It is a new skill I've learned. Okay. If being on the spectrum made you politically violent, you would not be able to walk 10 yards in this country without stepping over dead billionaires or politicians. Autistic people are everywhere. People with ADHD are everywhere. People with OCD are everywhere. We are everywhere. People with depression are everywhere. We're everywhere, man. And it's come down to, if it feels like sometimes, oh, the spectrum is so broad now that you have to wonder, is anybody not on the spectrum? Gee, I fucking wonder. It's almost like it's not that there are normals and then abnormals, abby-normals. If you know, you know. It's not like you have brains that are normal and then abby-normal. It's that you have brains on a spectrum, and one piece of that spectrum, frankly, quite stupidly, thinks that because society continues to reward their brain spectrum, their brain's spectrum, that's the normal one. And everybody around them must be like you and not be on the spectrum. And it's not that all these people are on the spectrum like you and learning how to mask like this group of people so that they can get something out of a world where this group of people on this part of the spectrum get everything. But we're not getting angry. It's just that I look and think, I look at the situation and think, just like that woman whose experience with sex education in the Mormon faith was so different from mine, that her experience with sex education had to do with her eating, or these women that I hear about from Dr. Jennifer Finlayson Fife when I was talking to her about how their education about about sex in the church was about the way they understand their own bodies and parts of their bodies having a purpose. Or an interview that I did with a gay man who was a nurse, and a nurse who had HIV, who was HIV positive, and he said, I said, I guess you never hear about in the Mormon community, you never hear about how many people have HIV. It just doesn't get talked about. It's taboo to even talk about. Do you want to say anything to that? And he had told me in this interview, I wish I could find it. I lost a whole bunch of footage. I got to figure out what I have and don't have. But he said, I am shocked. He said, can I tell you honestly, I am shocked how little Mormons in Utah, particularly, how little they understand about the concept of infection generally. I said, wait a minute, say that again. And he said, I'm startled at how common it is for Mormons to get sick because they don't understand germ theory at even the most fundamental level as a culture and as a society. So how shocking it is, especially with gay men in Mormon culture who have had to be quiet about it and been on in the closet all their lives, and so have had to stay so far away from any mention of gay sex or any sex, and have tried so long to not think about sex, and felt so pressured to not think about sex, that when you tell these, he says, when these young men who come out of the closet, young people, when they come out of the closet, and you tell them you're supposed to ask the people you have sex with when the last time they got tested for STIs was, it either didn't even occur to them, or they think that that's an immoral thing to do. This is me repeating it the way I remember it many years later now. And he said, and that's partly why in the gay community here in Utah, we just don't talk about how stupidly common it is for HIV and for other sexually transmitted infections to spread in the gay community, not because gay sex is more likely to spread sexually transmitted infections, but because the repression, the religious and cultural oppression to make gay people not think about sex means that they don't it means that they're even less prepared than even the straight Mormons or the non-gay Mormons who already had too little education on sex and safe sex to begin with. For the gay community, it was so much more dangerous. He said, because and I said, but I don't understand, how could it be that much more dangerous? I said, he said, you've heard that there are places you can go in Utah and just have gay sex. And I'm like, okay, everybody's heard a rumor about, like, you've heard a rumor. And he's like, yeah, that. Tell me the rumor. I said, I heard something about in Pioneer Park. He said, there's a men's room there where if you go to this men's room, this public restroom in Pioneer Park, it's understood, and you go into the stall, it's understood that you're there for sex with a man. I'm like, yeah, stuff like that. He's like, it's true. I said, it is? He's like, yeah, that's true. That's a real thing. I was like, wait a minute. There's another one. He's like, "Yeah, go on." I'm like, "That there's a certain day and time in the men's showers at the gym at BYU." And he's like, "If you go on," I think it was like Tuesday in the like 9 a.m., 9 between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. or something. I forget what it was now. And he said that it's just understood that you're there to have sex in the showers. And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "It's true. That's a true thing. It's real." I was like, I just always thought that was a thing that Mormons made up. He's like, it's a thing that everybody knows about and keeps quiet so that gay guys who are in the closet can go have sex. And he said, but how many times in those showers or in those stalls do you think somebody stops and goes, "Hey, dude, when was the last time you got tested for? How many partners have you had?" He said, and then you have men who come through town who are used to going through these red states where there's so much repressed sexuality and finding dudes on Grinder or whatever who are, you know, frankly just always looking to hook up. And these men from all over the country who just go cross through, these people who go crossing through the state, they don't even think, apparently nobody even thinks to ask them. And he's like, and it's like, it's not just that we were repressed about sex, it's that we were unintelligent and uninformed, even just about the basics of things like, oh, well, you can't get it from blowjobs. When it's like, okay, get what? You have this and you have this and you have this. You have the difference between viral infections and bacterial infections. And what about this? Oh, but you can't get it if you do this. You totally can. The only way to stay safe is, and he says that because the culture says don't teach young people about safe sex because then they'll want to have sex, is not just stupid because obviously we think about sex as human beings when we think about sex, and all of us know when at what time in life we think about sex, but because it's almost like an effort to keep people getting sick and keep people from being able to understand their bodies and keeping it a secret, so that, particularly not to hurt people, but because you just don't care as long as it's not hurting you. And he says, and how is that Christian? How is that loving? How is that loving your neighbor? The hypocrisy in it. And as I was thinking about that, not only it's like how we don't understand the experience, how my turning to understand my experience inwardly as a young autistic Mormon boy who was Mexican American but had a white man's name and had to learn how to make a joke about it so that when people looked at me and heard my name, learned my name, but saw a Mexican boy, and I had to diffuse this uncomfortable situation because social anxiety of people around me would ratchet up my feelings and my awareness and overstimulate me to decompress the situation. I'd have to make a joke about it. I know I have a white man's name. That's just because I murdered him and stole his identity so I could stay in the country. Oh, he addressed the thing about how he looks Mexican but has a white man's name. Oh, we can laugh about it. Oh, good, everybody's. And all my life, come to realize in that moment that how much of my sense of humor and my jovial, bubbly personality, my making wisecracks and making other people laugh. And I always think of it in my head as, oh, I just like people to have a good time. I just like to be the kind of person that you'd want to hang around with and have a good time with that was about diverting people away from saying things like, well, that's the autistic boy who's always in his own little world. Well, that's the autistic boy who apparently is Mexican but has a white person's name. I don't know about that. So apparently his parents are an interracial couple. Wow. How much of my ability, my learning how to make other people laugh or entertain other people was about mediating the overstimulation that I was sensing all the time while so many people close to me thought I either didn't feel anything or that I was just always having a good time and feeling happy go lucky and always wanting to make a wisecrack, always wanting to make a joke because I'm just this happy guy. And then found out when I was an adult that I was depressed and suicidal the whole time and were startled how many of my friends, when I told them, you realized that I was suicidal that entire time, that I was depressed all the time. And people who were my closest friends said, "Wait a minute, what time?" All the time. "Wait a minute, how long a time?" Oh, okay, let's put it this way. I tried to hang myself from a tree in my parents' yard when I was 11 years old. You know that, right? No, I didn't know that. How would I know that? Oh, yeah. I didn't tell anybody about that until I was in my 30s. How would you know about that? I don't know, I kind of felt like everybody must know, that everybody must be looking at me all the time and thinking, "There's that depressed kid who always talks to himself and is always off in his own little world," and my closest friends didn't know because I had learned to mask so well as a human that I could protect myself from anybody figuring out I was strange and to stop hurting me. So when I met my inner child and actually got a visual look in my mind while I was tripping on mushrooms and thought I was going to meet this angry little boy, what I actually met was a boy who was terrified all the time. And since then, I can look back and realize how I was so convinced, even when I became an atheist, that because I used critical thinking, because I had read The Demon Haunted World, because I understood Carl Sagan's baloney detection kit, because I knew Hitchens back and front, baby, that I had given up Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon for reason and science and the future of reason, right? Thomas Paine all day, all the way, Korihor argument. I even published the Korihor argument before I understood this and realized that while I was doing this, this was all an autistic little boy who was terrified of the world and didn't know how much of his perception of the world was distorted by autism that made me constantly neurotic and looking inward to myself and how these things affect me, how everything that I interact with, and how even my standard of truth was as an atheist, not just as a Mormon, but now my atheist brain was about, well, when I look to myself and I look to my bias, I look to my experience, I look to evidence of what convinces me, was all about me, 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 and my experience. I thought, well, what? So I'm selfish? Is that it? I'm just a selfish asshole because I don't feel like I'm a selfish asshole. And that wasn't until that moment where I was the adult in a relationship, was protecting a child the way I protect my own children, that I began to realize that little boy doesn't know he's autistic. And he's trying to make sense of a world where he is constantly taking what other people are doing and assuming the worst. That he takes everything people are saying about him and assumes the worst of it. And then he takes those words and plants them into his heart and his mind. He mulls them over again and again, and uh, ruminates on them, incorporates them. And then now, lo and behold, all these years later, when I am quiet and neurotic and sitting with my feelings and meditating, the voice that comes up, my internal narrator, comes up and says, he's off in his own little world again. That's not me. That's somebody else who said that. I didn't mean to hurt my feelings. Didn't think that I could hear it. Didn't mean it in a mean way, but I heard it in a mean way. Oh, there's Joe, probably sneaking off with the Mervin's catalog again. That one was mean. That one was mean, but said by somebody who thought it was funny and thought I heard them say it, just because I stole the bra and panties section out of the Mervin's catalog on Sunday. If they didn't want me to have it, why did they send it to the house every week? See, there I go again. Make a joke out of it. Make a joke out of it so that people don't see that that hurt. And now that I'm the parent in this relationship with my inner child, I can see that this inner child always, this boy, this autistic boy, doesn't know what he's dealing with because he doesn't understand, because he wouldn't be diagnosed until well after he understood that he had autism, because all of his children have autism, and well, it came from somewhere, and their experiences, that's like, oh, well, did you know that your daughter, lays awake at night and ruminates about whether or not she has value in the world and deserves to live even though she's only 12 years old? Well, no, I didn't know that she did that, but that's like normal, right, for a 12-year-old? No. Oh, that's not normal for a 12-year-old? You kidding me? When I was 11 years old, I and then all of a sudden I have people saying to me, "Wait a minute, have you ever told anybody this?" Well, I mean, like, I mean, everybody has, that time when you're 11 years old. No, Joe, that's not normal. It's not. Well, you know how, like, people get on your case because you don't look people in the eye? I guess maybe that is, I knew that that wasn't me, that I was weird, but I don't know. I don't know why I don't look people in the eye. The first time that I was talking to a behavioral scientist, a behavioral therapist, who said, because that's an autism thing, that's what autistic kids do, and you had autism? Oh, oh, okay. Uh, Need a little moment to be alone. And then I meet and talk to even people. I have a friend, not going to reveal too much of this because this is an ongoing situation. I have a friend who is an atheist and an ex Mormon who went back to the church, who overshared with me because that's something that people with autism do, some of us, that he had gone back to church after going to meet with his bishop and talking to his bishop about how he wanted to believe in the church, but he didn't want to give up coffee because stimulants helped him to mitigate um, his ADHD symptoms. And I said, "And your bishop said," he said, "Bishop said that's fine." And I'm like, "Okay, first of all, good for you, cool bishop. Never move out of that ward, I guess, and don't let them ever release that bishop from his calling, I guess. I don't know." I'm like, dude, just good luck to you with your priesthood roulette future. But whatever. But I said to him, and I said, but you went to the bishop for more than just coffee. I mean, it's not just about whether or not you're drinking coffee, right? You wanted to get rebaptized in the church. You want to come back to the church. And he's like, right. And I'm like, because. And he's like, well, I had other things I was trying to work out. I'm like, yeah, you were looking at porn. He's like, I guess you're going to tell me everybody does it. I said, not like people with ADHD, you don't. And he says, what does that have to do with it? I'm like, you really don't know about this? You should look into it. I'm like, you're telling me about all this reading that you're doing about theology coming back to the church because your brain is rabbit holing, because you have a neurospicy brain, man. And you don't apparently know, though, that you can rabbit hole down this rabbit hole, that hypersexuality, quote unquote, and ADHD go together because people with ADHD brains are always looking for ways to stimulate their nervous system so it doesn't get overwhelmed with all the other shit that you're dealing with. While people assume that we don't have feelings, like we're some kind of psychopaths or narcissists. And it turns out it's not that autistic people can't feel, it's that we feel everything all the time. And no one knows. They don't know. And if nobody in society at large knows, I guarantee you your fucking bishop doesn't know, dude. I'm like, for a while you were angry and you didn't want to be that anymore. Cool. Now you want to be Mormon again. Fine. Great. Good for you, man. I wish you nothing but the best. I really do. But what I'm telling you is this: do not trust your bishop with shit that you should be trusting to a therapist, man, or to a person, particularly a therapist who specializes in autism, because you're on the spectrum, man. And I care about you and I care about my people and people who experience things like me, like I did as a child, because autistic people, nobody knew how to understand or interpret what we were expressing and what we were feeling. And so we were processing really difficult stuff by ourselves. And we thought it was Mormonism. I did. I thought it was just Mormonism. And it wasn't. It was on a whole other level. And so when I look back and realize how much Mormon stuff that I was deconstructing and angry at the church for, and angry at my parents for, and angry at my siblings or my friends for, or angry at my teachers at church for, but for all of these things, there's this whole layer to unpack of hurts, of the death by 1,000 cuts into this little boy's psyche that were not anyone's fault. It wasn't the church's fault. Now, there were all these things that were the church's fault. Yes, it was. And my leaders, yes, absolutely. And our priesthood leaders, oh, yes. And the 12, oh my gosh, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started about Richard G. Scott. I'm still angry. Don't even get me started about Boyd K. Packer. I'm still angry. Don't even get me started about Dallin H. Oaks. I am still angry. I'm just not angry all the time, because I realize that here you have these people who have an assignment to be the spiritual guides of generations of other human beings that they do not fundamentally understand. That when David Archuleta says that he met with President Ballard, you wouldn't think I'd forget that name. President Ballard telling him, when we passed that November 5th policy, we didn't know what to do. We didn't realize how it would affect you guys. We thought we were doing the best thing we knew how, and we made a mistake. And even now, because David Archuleta has written a book about that, you have Mormon apologists all over the spectrum saying, who used to love David Archuleta's music. They went and called in and voted for him when he was on American Idol. Used to cheer and buy his albums and cheer and loved him when he would sing with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, while the rest of us Exmos standing around going, they get he's gay, right? How many people have been ex-Mormon that long? Odds all these ex-Mormon, all of us ex-Mormons go, boy, are these Mormons in for a treat when they find out that this boy is gay. His deconstruction is going to be epic, and they are not ready for it. And I think to myself, this moment that he talks about and that he writes about, where he met a man who was a prophet, seer, and revelator who had to admit to him, we don't really see that much. Turns out we are, without saying it in so many words, turns out we are just these old white men, straight white men who didn't realize until we were in this position that there was a whole range of experiences of people out there that we didn't understand as anything but sinful, because we had we only beginning now to understand as old men that they had lived their entire life with the privilege of not knowing the shit that their own wives were going through, the shit their own daughters were going through, let alone the shit that gay men were going through or gay women, and let alone what trans people must be going through, let alone what autistic people are going through, let alone people who are on the fringe side of autism where the diagnostics are not meant to cover that, where the diagnostics of Asperger's were made specifically to find autistic people who were not meant, so that they could be diagnosed with autism without putting the word autism on it, because the word autism was dangerous, because the man that Asperger's is named after was a Nazi scientist who was put in charge by the Fuhrer of a program of figuring out which autistic children should be allowed to live. And and the Reich fell and Asperger lived. And at that point, when the world tried to reunify and reconstruct and carry on, the person who had the most experience with diagnosing autistic children was Hitler's man. And at the time, people were all sold. At the time when I was a child, in my childhood, in my lifetime, this man, people assumed that he was part of the solution, not the final solution, but part of the resistance from inside the machine, inside the German machine, to figure out which autistic children should be spared of a hospital in Vienna where they sent these children telling their parents, the Fuhrer has authorized a new treatment that will make your child who is so strange and straighten them out and cure them. And these parents from all over German occupied Europe said, that's fantastic. Please take him. And sent these children to this hospital in Vienna, only to get a telegram back shortly thereafter that said, tuberculosis outbreak, stop. Your child sadly passed away, stop. Cremated to control the outbreak of the infection, stop. Heil Hitler, stop. And that it turns out that while we had been sold that it was Asperger who was the guy who had come up with a diagnostic to save autistic children so they didn't end up getting sent to this extermination camp, it wasn't exclusively true, because he was also one of the ones who was sending kids there. And the whole time that I was a young autistic kid who didn't get a diagnosis, and all these people from this whole generation who couldn't get a diagnosis, especially girls who don't who didn't experience autism symptoms in the same way, who were too quiet, very bookish, kind of nerdy, kind of talks to herself, keeps to herself, likes to stay busy. She likes to stay busy, but she likes to sleep in late. She likes to engage in crafty things, but she doesn't take it seriously as an art. She only gets into crafts, and she gets into all the crafts and can't figure out what she wants to do, even when she's being creative. And it's such a shame because she's so creative. She's autism. They didn't know, but they really didn't know because the experts on the subject were just starting to try to figure it out without the proper amount of resources. And as I came to understand myself and connect inwardly to myself as this inner scared autistic child, I not only began to forgive the church and the church's leadership for those things that had nothing to do with them. Okay, that's not them, that was autism. They had plenty they did wrong. And there's plenty that if they were prophets of God, they should have known. But they don't because there is no God. So that's okay, I guess. It didn't feel great figuring it out and deconstructing it, and it made me angry for 10 years, 15 years, close to 20 years. It made me very angry until I realized that the church doesn't know that I'm angry. I got excommunicated. Do you think anybody of the quorum of the 12 apostles or the first presidency knows about that? Fuck that. They don't know. They don't know and they don't want to know. They don't care. What gets spoken of in hush corners in Salt Lake City when people say, "Have you heard of the Church of Korihor?" They don't know about us. They don't want to know about us. They don't think about us. They certainly don't think about me. That's okay. But they don't think about this at all. They're free of this. They're free of any guilt associated with this. Good for them. And to realize how liberating it would feel if I didn't have to carry it either. If I knew the secret combination, the secret code to just taking this experience, this death by a thousand cuts I lived with as an autistic child, and just release them and say, well, that's nobody's fault. That's not my fault either. It's not my fault I had autism. Maybe I could just decide I don't want to carry it, not because of forgiveness. Forgiveness felt, oh, thanks for coming back, Four Corns. Thanks a lot. I'm glad that you, by the way, sorry about this real quick tangent. Hey, I wanted to say, I went back and I read your comment, Four Corns. And I'm glad if that's true that Mitiga heard our song at the end of, I don't know if he heard the whole sermon, which I wouldn't expect him to. But that song at the end of that sermon, I'm glad he liked it. I hope he found it very enlightening. I want to, I, if you are talking to Chief Mitiga, if you're talking to David Taylor or whatever he goes by now, number one, I'm watching what he's doing. He should know that. I'm open to talking to him and clearing the air. And if that song was helpful and healing to him, then that's what it was for. And I hope you will convey to him that I am glad. I'm glad. Did he write to me? He wrote to me where? Give him my personal email, would you? Or even better, tell him to connect to me through Stephen Pinecker. I know that Stephen's talking to him. I don't know if I'm authorized to say that, but I'm taking advantage of an opportunity. I'm sure he does. Well, no, I don't. Look, can't diagnose anybody. But anyways, my sermon. I'm glad. I'm glad he got something out of it because it seems to me like he's a man who could use some healing. So good for him. And it seems to me like he wants to. Sorry, guys, go back on course here. Um, I realized that connecting with my autistic inner child had connected me, widened my perspective of the world, even as an atheist and an ex-Mormon. That while I felt like my life as a Mormon was so narrowly focused and my understanding as an atheist had widened out, it's that insight into my experience as an autistic boy and not forgiving. I think technically you would call it forgiving, but at least releasing from responsibility a group of people, starting with me, and saying, "This autistic child doesn't know what he's going through. He didn't ask for autism. He didn't need autism. He doesn't need anxiety any more than my children need it. Can I just decide I'm not taking guilt for that into the future with me?" And it was like all of a sudden, it was like a heavy veil, a heavy, that's very religious sounding, a heavy shroud of darkness also sounds religious. Anyways, a heavy fog, a heavy layer was removed from this inner core of me that made me feel completely liberated from responsibility for so many things that the church had neglected to teach us because they didn't know. And then from there, I was able to release them and say, well, they don't know. Do you think that the brethren understood what autism was? They didn't know. They didn't even know what they were looking for. Hell, look at how they are still trying to deal with the aftermath of the Pace Memorandum and the Satanic Panic. Do you think that they're spending any resources or time to try to understand what the experience of autistic Mormons is? I guarantee you they don't care. Or it's not even that they don't care, it's that they don't know they're supposed to care. And so many of the people that are leaving the church now, the church just Mormon Church just published the numbers for the first time to show that in the United States, their numbers are shrinking instead of expanding. And I can't help but wonder why. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. I'm an autistic man being sarcastic right now. I do understand why. I know better. I'm sure they know something about it, but I guarantee you I know better because I'm on the other side catching the people who fall out of the church. And so many people who leave the church. There's a guy who's going around promoting a book he just wrote. They did a whole study on what makes people leave the church. I'm like, man, I told Steve Pinecker with like as a joke recently. I said, you could have asked me. I'll tell you. You think I don't know? I know. In fact, I got a word. Gene dropped me a line from Latter Daily Digest and said, "Did you know that Steve Pinecker mentioned you in his interview with that guy who wrote the book about why people left the church?" I'm like, "No way." He's like, "Yeah, it's between the 30 and 40-minute mark." And I went and I listened to it, and sure enough, he says, "This guy, Exmo Joe, had told me that it's the first thing first doubt that you had in the church that usually becomes the first thing that you admit that you admit to yourself when you leave the church, that the oldest doubt that you have is the one that breaks your shelf." And this Mormon guy, I guess, who wrote this whole book about it, kind of went, huh, yeah, I think that's probably true. I'm like, they could have asked us. We are here. We've been doing this. And the irony is right now they're suing the guy who probably knows most of these things better than anybody else. I guarantee you, whatever I know about why people leave the Mormon church, John Dehlin knows much better. And they're suing that guy. So, okay. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And this is what it came out to for me. And that I was recently thinking about what is my role now that I have taken this oath to share these godless sermons with atheists and agnostics who have so much religious trauma to heal from. And I realized in that moment I have learned something so valuable. that I wish I could reach out to all my godless friends who, just like autistic people, and many of you are autistic. Oh, that would be great, Hyde. Or even better if they took it to court and lost. I almost want I almost hope it happens that way. I hate to say it. Um, I wish, even, just like autistic people, and many of you are autistic people, that's part of the thing. I think the church doesn't know they're supposed to look for, who are atheists. We, as atheists and agnostics and people who are non-religious, spiritual, not religious, whatever you feel comfortable with. I take atheist as a label. I enjoy it. Um, but that doesn't, but if I, and as I've told many a person, I'm like, do you really want to know what my feelings are? Do you really want to know what the accurate word to describe it is? Every atheist is agnostic. I don't know one that isn't. I don't know any atheist who is so stubborn and hard-nosed that they won't admit that they could believe in God if somebody could give them a good reason to. And then you get these believers, I get these believers bitching and moaning at me. I'm sorry to use the people's vernacular here, about, you don't understand, that's called atheistic agnosticism, or it's called atheist agnosticism, or it's called agnostic atheism. And I'm like looking at you thinking, you really think I don't know that? You think I don't know that? I'm the atheist here. I'm telling you. I'll tell you what we're experiencing. You've never done this. And certainly you've never served people who are doing it. So many of my fellow atheists out there, I feel like, especially if you have left religion in the past, need to hear this thing that I wish somebody had said to me a long time ago. Some of the things that let me say it this way. It's okay to be angry right now. And I won't tell you that your anger has nothing to do with the church or with its founders, its leaders, or its scriptures, your parents, your family, your pastor. I won't tell you that none of that is justified. If it feels justifiable to you that you're angry, then that anger is justifiable. And it may not be right now. You don't have to commit to do this right now. But I wish somebody had explained to me that there's a point in the future where, if you are being honest with yourself and you are really using critical thinking, you will release from responsibility of certain people the innocence of their not knowing the harm that they caused. And you'll see that some of the things they did that hurt you, they did with the best of intentions, and that you don't have to forgive it to release it. That it's not a question of forgiving, in a sense of saying, well, it's okay, they did okay, they didn't do anything wrong. It's a matter of saying, if they really didn't do it maliciously to hurt you, and then they moved on, they just did it because in the moment they needed it, they needed to believe that it was true. And yes, they should have been. It would be lovely to say they should not be taking any responsibility in bringing up young people in the church if they're not going to be responsible about thinking through whether or not the things they're teaching are hurtful. That's okay to think, but at the same time, they are just human beings like you and me, and they are trying to make sense of their own trauma. And many of them were traumatized by the church in the same way that you were. And it doesn't take anybody with any particular malicious intent in the church to say, "I tell you what we're gonna do," drumming their fingers and saying, "We're gonna plant in their brain body image issues, and we're gonna plant in their brain things that make them have eating disorders. We're gonna plant in their brain that they're gonna be dependent upon us." It turns out that this behavior that sometimes, yes, it chalks up to narcissism and wicked people who really do who really are just willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to power. Sure. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you that doesn't exist. I know who Joseph Smith was. I'm not gonna tell you it doesn't exist. I know who Richard G. Scott was. I'm not gonna tell you that doesn't exist. I know who Boyd K. Packer was. I know who these men were. And not just men. And just like I look around now and I see this Paula White person and think, it's just Joseph Smith all over again. I look around and I see these pastors, how many times you put into a news search and say pastor arrested, and you don't even have to guess, right? You don't have to guess. Oh yeah, for embezzling church funds? No, it's for touching kids. Or worse, probably worse. And I look at these people and think, for every one of those that maliciously did it, there are a dozen people who, or more all around them who probably should be looking around and checking to make sure, is this happening here? Is it happening here? That doesn't happen here, right? Are are we training people? Do we have a system to keep this from happening here? Instead, have their blinders up and saying, "Oh, I'm not sure," and thinking not so much in words as in feelings. I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do if I look around and find out that what happened in Boston is happening here. If I find out that what they've been doing in Rome and that we are all pointing and say, you see how the Catholics are? At least in Arch. Oh my God, I saw the Boy Scouts. Oh shit, not the Boy Scouts. I sent my kids into Boy Scouts. That's not happening to my kids. That didn't happen to my kids, right? That didn't happen to my husband, did it? It didn't happen to my brother, did it? And with the best of intentions, because they couldn't get overwhelmed and allow their nervous systems become overwhelmed. They looked past it. And while it's totally reasonable to be angry about that, they have to be able to move on from it. And if they can work their way through to moving on from it and saying to themselves, it's not that I wanted harm to come to people, it's that I couldn't handle any more responsibility than I already had on my plate since I was dealing with my own shit. Then being part of being a grown up and being the adult in this relationship with the inner child that you were, yes, who was evangelical, was a preterist evangelical, was Baptist, was Catholic, was Orthodox or Jewish, was a Scientologist, maybe part of the Sea Org, was Mormon, Christian, whatever. Yes, part of that is a Christian child or a Mormon child or a religious child, but it's also a girl, a boy, a non-binary person, a trans person, a gay person, a person whose sexuality is fluid, whose gender is fluid. It turns out new research shows, it's not that all people who are gender fluid or gender queer or pansexual or bisexual. It's not that all those people are autistic, but almost all autistic people are one of those things, at least one of those things. And then we got this whole hypersexuality thing. And they're out there, there are people out there, there are charlatans out there taking advantage of people, but they're not exclusively religious charlatans. There's whole apps. If you've heard of the Breeze app or the Liven app, they have whole apps now that it's been revealed. If you look into this, I did a Godless sermon on this. No one's prepared to really look into this like I've looked into it. They have apps that are marketed for people with ADHD that they know don't work and that frankly are expensive. And because they're all marketed through um, and because of the way that they're marketed and sold, they end up taking advantage of people who have ADHD because they know they made whole apps to take our money down the road, down the line, because they know how difficult it is for a person with ADHD to call a number and confront somebody about getting their money back. And so there's this whole scams that are in front of our eyes all the time, these apps that were built specifically to abuse ADHD people for having ADHD. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's just out there happening. There are humans doing it just because they can get away with it. And meanwhile, if we're sitting here dealing with our inner conflicting feelings about, does the church not know that they did this to an autistic person? They don't. They don't know. Do they not know that they did this to a gay person? They probably don't know. And maybe they should. They should. They should care. If they care about other people, if they care about their flock, they should care. Okay, but they don't. And that might be because they're suddenly they're suddenly thrust into a situation where it's only beginning to dawn on them, or would dawn on them if they took the time to be self-aware, that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And that if there's going to be somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to serving other people in the spiritual needs, maybe it's self-serving me to say, but it's got to be godless people. Why? What did I say at the beginning? Jesus taught, whoever Jesus is, the character of Jesus, taught that unless you receive the kingdom of God like a small child, you cannot enter therein. So that means to be a Christian, to be a submissive follower, to be a disciple, is to become like a little child. But that's not going to cut it in a world where you have to deal with grown up things. Children can't deal with grown up things. I mentioned it in my book, The Korihor Argument, which I'm sure every person who is going to ever read it has read it. So I'll just tell it to you now. When I was giving up my faith in Mormonism, I was a missionary in Peru, and I had a companion named Elder Johns, Steve Johns, and he was like my best friend. He was just about the smartest guy I'd ever known. I never gotten along with anybody like I had with Steve Johns. He was actually actually, now that I think of it, he was my zone leader, not my companion, but he was a friend. And we had this work, what do you call it? We had cambios in Spanish. Anyways, we had a work visit where we were sharing an apartment, and we'd switched companions for a day. And he and I were just talking, and we were both trunky. I mean, he was going home like in a couple of weeks. I was going home in like a month or two. And I said to him, "You know what the thing is?" I think I even called him Steve back then. You're like, "You know what I think it is, Steve?" I had to call him Steve, or I called him Johns. Anyway, and he said, "Splits." Thank you, Ross. One of these days, I'm going to find out what your first name is. Um, and he said, and I said, "You know what it is? We're from border states." And he's like, "Okay, I don't get it. What are you saying to me right now?" I said, "I'm from Arizona. You're from Utah. This is not the first time you and I, as adults, this is the first time any of us as adults are interacting with people from another culture. But because you and I grew up on the border with Mexico and had experience with Mexican culture, it's the first time that you and we are the ones, we were better prepared than these other white American boys who love to say such racist things about Peruvians, and they did. And I'm not going to say I didn't participate in it at all. I definitely didn't do as much as these other white American boys did, but I had my share in it, and I carry the guilt about that. But I did then too, and I had to deconstruct racism on my mission a lot. And it wasn't just the white American boys; it was also the Colombian boys. But that's like a whole other thing. Racism, white people, and Latin Americans is almost incomparable to the racism Latin Americans have for each other. And I said, but you and I, we both had experience and exposure to a foreign culture and spoke a little Spanish before we got out here and knew immigrants before we got out here. That's why you and I aren't as racist as these other boys. And I remember him looking at me. Elder Johnson was pretty wise. And he said, I don't think that's it at all, Joe. I said, okay. Calling me out? Cool. What is it then? He said, this is the first situation in our lives where we have been tasked to deal with adult things as adults. And we're doing it with people who have been adults longer than we have. Whoa. It's a little embarrassing to think that hadn't occurred to me, but it hadn't. It took somebody else's objective perspective to knock my hair back with that. I realized only after I left the church, I realized this still is like one of the most important things anybody's ever most important observations I've ever heard from anybody. We were children sent on a mission to deal with very adult things as if we were adults, practicing it on adults who had been adults a lot longer than we had. And we were just expected to think of ourselves like we were adults and know what we were doing. And guess what? Many missionaries, just like me, in doing exactly that, came to realize that they had no business doing that. They had no business doing that and sending us out here with this little training. That we were here talking to people about their living in sin. And we had no training in marital counseling. We had no training in preparing people to make an emotional commitment to enter into a marital covenant. They didn't train us on anything to do with that. We learned how to tell people the Joseph Smith story in Spanish. We had no preparation for the level of spiritual responsibility we had, but we put this black name tag on, and here we are, mainly foreigners from a strange, exotic, faraway place. And people invited us into their home, and we were made to be their spiritual guides. And we told them about what? Tithing, the word of wisdom that even Joseph Smith didn't live by when he got drunk as a skunk, not wearing his garments on the day he died when he was married to at least 30 women, including at least half a dozen young girls. We were left in a situation of telling other people and being spiritual guides to other people. We were sabotaged. And maybe that's the most important training I had for doing what I'm doing now. I could have gotten so much more angry. And people look at me now and say, you're such an angry, toxic atheist, strident atheist now. I sit back and I say, You can say that. That's cool. But I'm actually quite chilled out because I have people who go back to the church and are friends of mine, and I love them and tell them I love you and I express love for you. That, by the way, no Mormon would feel that way about you if you left the church and came to the Church of Korihor. I'm just saying, but go ahead, do what you need to do. Because I can look back at the course of my life and realize that there will always be, much to the chagrin of the toxic atheist that I was just 5, 6, 7 years ago, there will always be a part of me that is a Mormon boy. And that's not only okay, it's great because my experience in Mormonism made me a better atheist. But how do you even be good at atheism? You really can't. So what is it? It made me a better man. Made me a better father. It made me a better husband. That's a good observation, Diana. It made me a better friend. And when I looked around and realized there's nobody doing this kind of spiritual mentorship on any organized level for atheists and agnostics, thinking that we have and we ourselves oftentimes thinking that we have abandoned spirituality altogether. The very word is so triggering for me for years while I was engaged in spiritual work and had no idea that I was. I would curse anybody who said that I was on a spiritual journey because that word had become so toxic to me, just like church is so toxic a word to me. Faith, I still won't go for because I still think that's a bad thing. But that I was doing this spiritual development and thinking to myself, we need a way to explore the fact that your upbringing in church, if you do have an upbringing in church, was a preparation for understanding reality and your role and responsibility as an adult dealing with adult things. That to be an adult is not to magically transform into a different kind of person who's capable of handling a lot of responsibility at the same time. That's just being just a child who took on more responsibility and then had to learn to take on more and more responsibility. And to when those moments, and you all know it, you all know what I'm talking about. I think, I hope. If not, maybe reflect and become aware right now that there's that moment where it says, but that's so unfair. It's so unfair that it should be me, that suddenly I'm responsible for this very heavy thing. This is a lot of responsibility, and I didn't sign up for that. And it's so unfair. And then you had to just let it go. Yeah, it's unfair. Oh well. That's being an adult, taking on more and more responsibility, regardless of whether or not it is fair. And then that becomes the work that you take on every day for the rest of your life. And I think the church isn't prepared to deal with that. You think that Pope Leo knows anything about helping people through that? I guarantee you he does not. Do you think that the Dalai Lama understands how to tell people through that? Maybe he does, and I just don't understand him. But I tell you this, the more I get to understand the Dalai Lama, the more I realize, oh, this person is definitely not what I thought he was. But do you think that Dallin H. Oaks knows anything about that? These men don't know what they're doing. And of course they don't. They're just falling into these positions because they were born to privilege and they were born into a position where people trusted them to be their leaders. And I can't help but wonder that most of them probably know somewhere inside of themselves, whether they're ready to admit it or not, that they exist in these roles more because somebody needs a person in that role than any qualification that they have for it. Were it any other way, explain to me how it is that a lawyer and a judge is regarded as a prophet of God right now. Explain to me how a cardiothoracic surgeon was considered a prophet of God just before him. In the same tradition, where the first modern prophet, seer, and revelator in that same tradition was a teenage boy who spent his days convincing people he could look at a rock in his hat and tell them where Indian treasure was buried on their land, only to explain to them later that, oh, it was there, but it slipped away. Oh, same tradition 200 years down the road. They don't know. They didn't know. And to not know what you're doing, well, but be in a role because other people need you to be in that role. It's just about, it's mostly innocent. Not entirely, not entirely. You're right. Some of it is neglect, some of it is greed. A lot of it is greed. But now they have this challenging situation where the people are leaving because they have access to resources, to understanding truth and reason and knowledge. And the church is failing these people. They're failing them. Who is succeeding? Who is taking up the mantle now? Who is taking up the call? Who takes up the call in your personal life? And who will answer the call of other people to say, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what to do. I wish I could just, talk to somebody and it's not about confessing my sins or joining your organization or doing this or that practice or ordinance or ritual. It's just about, do you know how it is that I can like just release the guilt from this without having to like call it forgiving? Because I don't know that I can forgive. If it's not us doing it for each other, nobody's going to take it up. And that's why I think that deconstructing anger with the church is one of the most significant, important things that we can do as people who have left church behind, because you only have so many days left on this world. You flash in the dark, literally. That just like when an owl or the James Webb Space Telescope looks at you and sees light coming off of your body in the form of infrared light, because that's the spectrum that they see in owls and the James Webb Space Telescope. I know some of this is weird. You get it. Just go with it. Geek out a little bit. It's a church for atheists. We'll do that sometimes. You flash, you glow, you emit light, real light into the universe. And yes, I understand that that's a physical principle. It's metaphor. Just go with it. Atheists. But only from the point where you were born to the point where you die. As far as we know, and frankly, for some of us, especially some of us who are autistic, thankfully, there's no you outside of that beginning to that end, from the cradle to the grave. This moment is all we have. And if you look at your life, most of it's already gone. Well, maybe not most of it, but one day, most of it. And you have no time. You have no time to waste on the church. You've got other people, you've got you to heal, and you've got the people that you love to help. And you've got people out there all around you whose lives are full of pain. They're cold and they are hungry and they are overstimulated and overwhelmed. And that's why, if it comes down to Jesus or St. Paul, I pick St. Paul every time, even though I'm not a big fan of St. Paul. But if it's down to Jesus or St. Paul, I'll take St. Paul every time. Because when Jesus says that he who does not receive the kingdom of God like a little child cannot enter therein, Paul says, Look, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I thought as a child, I understood as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Yeah. And there's no thing more childish than God. And it hurts to let him go. But it's the most progressive and beautiful experience of my life once I understood that I don't have to decide that somebody else is innocent to understand that I'm not going to carry anger for them anymore. It's about me living my future, enjoying my future, and feeling every day like my life is worth living. And that spiritual growth, the church was a part of it. I'm willing to accept that. Leaving the church was the biggest acceleration of my spiritual development I have ever had in my life, up until I tried psychedelics and became a parent to my inner child and took responsibility for that. And then within just a couple of years, just 4 years or so, realizing that the next step was the Church of Korihor. Like I said from the beginning, I'm forging ahead, doing what makes me feel fulfilled and like everything, like I am doing something worth doing. And if no one else comes with me, I'm not going to know, because I'm not going to look back. I don't got time to look back, man. You got to catch up with me. You got to come up arm in arm with me and help me carry this together, because frankly, we got little time left, man. However much time each of us individually has, in the grand scheme of things, we got one chance, got just one chance to do something that makes lives worth living. Amen. I'm going to try to get something out there, maybe even it's just a hangout live before Wednesday, but working on some more Tim Ballard content for Wednesday. Maybe some Kai Schwimmer stuff too. In any event, that reminds me of a special Godless hymn from an album that we created last summer, small album called Heroes of the Resistance, and where we honor people in history who stood up to Christo-fascism before the most recent reiteration of Christo-fascism. And one of them was Jesse Owens. Flash bright, my friends.
This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along, this one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. Race in Ohio, the plan couldn't break me. The Buckeye bullets, golden opportunity. Now I'll reach for that goal, take my race to Berlin, rock this old world with the heart to win. It's my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along, this one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. Swift up, swift down, this bullet will fly. The world will see Jesse's reason why we live and we die. My only race to win is Jesse Owens' heat. This is the bullet's race within. This is my one chance to prove Hitler wrong. Jesse Owens, one chance. I knew all along, this one chance to make them see. I have one chance to prove it to me. 4 golds later, he made it clear how he felt. Didn't shake my hand, nor would Roosevelt. Now I am gone, brothers all, our race goes on. This is your one chance to prove Hitler wrong. This is our chance, this is our song. Take your one chance to make them see. Take this one chance and race with me.